Hey guys, GhazzyTV here with another Path of Exile build guide video, and in this one I'm gonna be showing you the updated version of the Dark Pact Necromancer build guide. This is a guide that's been out on my vault page for a long time, and is probably one of the strongest builds in the entire game that I have ever played. And despite this, it keeps getting away with it every goddamn league. The reason for this is because very few people are actually playing this build, and that has a lot to do with how complex the mechanics of this build is to play, as well as it being a 2-button build. To alleviate the pressure of this kind of guide, to explain how this actually works for people, I've actually put up 2 other videos in combination with this one, and both will be linked in the descriptions below. One is explaining the defensive version or mechanics of this build, and the other one explains the offensive mechanics of this character. And this video guide was basically focusing on showcasing the actual build, and we're just going to kick right into it. So this character that I've been trying it out in low budget is sitting on a little bit low on the chaos res with capped elemental resistances, and it's running with a generic spell damage with spell crit and +1 spell skill trigger wand that I bought, or in this case scepter, that I bought for about 50 to 60 chaos. It's using a Volcaress that I bought for 3 chaos, a chest piece that I bought for 10 chaos, a helmet that I bought for 3c, 5 chaos, 2 chaos. I think I paid 15 for this one, and about 5 chaos for this, 5 or 4 chaos for darkness, jewels that didn't go above 10 chaos each, and then that's about it. The ring is also the same ballpark of 5 to 6 chaos. So the gear itself is basically stuff you find on the ground, or if you want to fine tune some specific stats such as resistances and whatnot. That's how we did it with this character. And basically this build is able to do tier 16 maps not very comfortably. Well, actually it is comfortable, but not very fast. If you would think that it's being a bit slow, it's not comfortable, then it is not comfortable for those people. However, the budget of this character is absolutely ridiculous. This character is able to do endgame bosses, and it's able to do tier 16 maps with this little investment. And a big investment that you want to start with is getting a Glorious Vanity to alleviate the pressure of needing to cast Wither Totems. All of this will be in detailed description in the actual written build guide, which is linked in the descriptions below. So do check that out for a more in-depth description of this entire guide of its mechanics and how to operate it. And I want to use this video to mostly showcase the character of how this build in low budget can do tier 16 Alcan Go, as well as endgame bosses. Whereas the high budget version, where there is both a defensive version and an offensive version, is able to kick out numbers like 200 million Shaper DPS without being extremely expensive, even for a low budget build. This build being a 2-button build has everything to do with summoning skeletons and having your Dark Pact being cast to chain between the skeletons. I don't want to talk too much about the mechanics of this. All of that will be in detail in the videos linked in the descriptions below. And instead I wanted to talk about the path of building, showing you guys the progression of this character. As you start leveling this build, you have a couple of options, which is running the regular leveling with whatever you want, like Freezing Pulse or Spark if you mule that, into Absolution, and then using Absolution until you get to like level 70 before switching to Skeletons for the Dark Pact. However, I'm a big fan of playing the build in the way it's supposed to be played at the end game, so I have a tendency of preferring to level with a build in the way they're supposed to be played. This is not the fastest way to do it with this character, but it is, in my opinion, the most enjoyable way of leveling. So no matter how you approach it, you can actually spec into some extra spell damage nodes that you can respec later for the early levels. But once you get to the Dark Pact and the Skeletons gem at level 4 and Dark Pact's level 28, you can actually start leveling with your Dark Pact. And I would strongly recommend getting the minion life nodes, as well as going over to Corruption here early on, or at least Heart of Darkness, and then rushing down to the side for the Spiritual Aid. The only thing that's actually mandatory for a low budget build once you get higher up is, of course, that you're running 1 medium cluster with Blessed Rebirth. Obviously, it's better if you have Hulking Corpses as well, but Blessed Rebirth is fundamental, because that way you're going to keep your minions alive, and the only time they take damage is when your Dark Pact's hitting them for the first 4 seconds. Another thing to point out is the attractiveness of a Divergent Dark Pact. If you are able to get a Divergent Dark Pact, you're actually able to keep all of your minions alive, including your skeletons, versus single target bosses without ever needing to resummon your skeletons. This makes the build so much more comfortable to play, and they don't really cost more than 10 or 20 chaos. Obviously, this is not something you'll start with investing into, but once you get yourself up to tier 14 plus maps, you're going to want to keep an eye out of getting a Divergent Dark Pact. They're very cheap, and very few people are playing this, which allows you to snag them very affordable purchase. That's basically the 2 main things you want to look into. It's the Cluster Jewel, which is very cheap. You can alteration craft it yourself. and as well the Divergent Dark Pact. After that, we're going to be looking into the higher body version, but the tree itself, basically the things you want to look at is covering yourself for the map state with Leaf Shade. This is helping you cover for the sake of damage or over time effects, especially chaos or fire dots on the ground. This is because the build is using Petrified Blood, so sometimes it can be very hard to see that you're taking damage from standing somewhere you shouldn't when your HP is cut in half, because Petrified Blood only covers hits. So that's why we're running with Leaf Shade on the low-budget version. Higher-budget version don't actually go for this, so we're going to look into that real quick. But before we do so, Pantheon-wise, I am running the Brine King with the upgrade to be avoiding being frozen, and I always run an upgraded Abrath to avoid being taking damage from the Burning Grounds, and it reduces the ignitions on me. However, the Ascendancy nodes, we want to rush into getting minus aggression into Bone Barrier because it gives your minions HP, which increases your damage output. And then you want to go for Mixer Sacrifice when you're using a trigger weapon to get yourself offerings. Outside of that, I'm going to go in and show you guys the medium and high budget version, which essentially is nowhere to be found. It's actually only a high budget version. And the reason for this is because every upgrade you do from the low budget should be a high budget item upgrade. And you can do them individually for this character, which is so cool. That basically means that when you move from low budget to a higher budget state, you basically just take anything from the high budget build and just apply that to the low budget build, and that's it. That's how you start your progression of upgrading your build. So I'm going to show you the defensive version because I firmly believe that this is stronger to go for in the start because it's way more sturdy. Still doesn't take up Leaf Shade, but you could spend the investments of doing so. However, what you want to do is pick up a Glorious Vanity of Doriani so you can get the Corrupted Soul. This also means that in the higher body version, especially when you start running this, you want to take away the Ghost Reaver and no longer run this. And that is because we either have two choices. Either you get yourself a Revitalizing Darkness, which will be available from the actual Glorious Vanity. And this is basically searched through the POB by searching for Glorious Vanity and then searching for notables. So if you look at Revitalizing Darkness, and you can also look at adding Ritual of Shadows. By adding these two nodes, you can then just search for this by generators or doing a search, and you'll see the different types of seeds of the numerical value in Glorious Vanity that you can look for that will have both of these in a very specific slot. That's how I was able to get these two slots right there. This one allows you to remove the Wither Totem from the build. Very, very cool to do so. And it makes the build much more comfortable, and this is for the higher body versions. And like I said, this will be one of the first initial upgrades you want to do because it alleviates so much quality of life on the build. And also the Revitalizing Darkness, giving you Chaos Damage Leech, and the Doriani's Corrupted Soul allows you to remove Ghost Reaver. Outside of that, this character is the more defensive version of the build. It has about 64 million Shaper DPS. I would honestly recommend looking into dragging that DPS down to maybe in the ballpark of 30 to 40 million to increase the defenses even more by getting things like Leaf Shade, more HP Energy Shield nodes and whatnot. It's a matter of personal preference. I tend to prefer to play this specific build more of a glass cannon myself though. The medium body versions, obviously the medium clusters will be now running both Blessed Rebirth and the Hulking Corpses because they drastically increase the damage output. We're also running an 8 passive, kind of cheap 40-50 Chaos large cluster, which Touch of Cruelty, Unholy Grace, and Unwaveringly Evil. And when you look at the glass cannon version, which I'm running and doing 6-man carried fair runs in the game right now on stream, this build packs about 211 million Shaper DPS. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the EHP is completely demolished and the build is rather squishy, even though I am running 100% Delirium tier 16s for this build. Every now and then this build will actually fall over and die, but I am playing it as an endgame bosser, which is why I would strongly recommend looking at the defensive version, because the type of damage that you get after 50 million Shaper DPS is honestly rather overkill and would only be reasonable to look at if you're looking into doing multiplayer carries for endgame bosses. That's where the damage could be comfortable to run with. But that kind of sums up the POBs, and the way I've been playing the build has been to circ down 6-man feared, 6-man endgame bosses, Eater Worlds, Uber Elder, Cortex, all of these bosses, and I'm also running services on Uber fights with this type of build. And what's really crazy with this kind of build is that even the high budget version that's doing 200 million, the budget in this is actually not that crazy. This specific version is running a Mage Blood, but that gives me lower damage than running Darkness and Throne, which is even more insane. So if I take away the mage spot, the build costs about 100 divines for the super high budget version. And that kind of shows how crazy it is to get these numbers on a build like this, even on this extreme level. Because normally these numbers would be a mirror tier build, in my opinion, that would cost you 5, 6, 7, 800 divines. But in fact, this build would actually be able to pull this off with about 100 divines invested. And then if you want to get more defenses on this type of version, a mage spell would be really nice. But most importantly, the low budget kicks on with really good damage numbers, about 3.7 million. I will say this though, I do my best to avoid inflating the DPS on my builds. The problem with Dark Pact is that it will always be slightly inflated due to this chaining of the Dark Pact happening after one another, and it's not entirely accurate. The other thing with a low budget version of this build is that this requires you to precast your skeletons, have a divergent Dark Pact. It also requires you to precast the Wither totems, and then you want to mark curse yourself and then also be casting your Dark Pact. So the DPS is slightly inflated on this specific PUB, so do keep that in mind. The DPS is closer to the ballpark of 2.5 million, which is still a very good number for this type of build and the damage output. Another thing to mention is that I do not have Animate Guardian in the low budget version of this character, so you can get much better damage numbers as well as fortification charges from the Kingmaker that he'll be wearing, as well as Culling Strike. So there's plenty of things that you can do to upgrade. I'm trying my best to keep the budget down as low as possible. And that's basically it. And if you want to know more about the mechanics of this build, do check out the videos linked in the description. The full-blown written guide is in the description as well, which goes through everything I've been talking about more in detail, so you can understand how to progress the build, how to play it, and what to do with gear progressions, and how to gear it, and which masters to take first and whatnot. So do check that out. If you like this type of video guide, let me know in the descriptions below. I've been doing it for a while now. I'm not sure if you guys would prefer to see more elaborate information on the video. If you do, let me know. Other than that, I'll keep doing showcases and basically make sure that the updated written build guide is the one you always want to look at in the end. And I'm using these videos to show the build off. But the written guide should always be the one you should refer to in the end. But that's basically it. Hope you guys liked the video. Make sure you hit the like button if so. Subscribe for more content. And let me know in the comments below what you guys think of it. Until next time, as always, stay safe and keep rocking.